Here's the situation, and it's a dire one. The Continental Army was actually broke. Soldiers, they were deserting because they weren't getting paid. And the British had taken Philadelphia. That was the capital of the time. And across the ocean, Franklin had to walk into a room of French aristocrats and make the case that this disaster was worth betting on. From the French perspective, if you think about it, backing the Americans looked like throwing money into a fire and hoping the fire somehow turned into a country. France had just lost a war against Britain, the 7 Years' War, and they lost badly, losing things like Canada. The treasury, it was still bleeding from before. And in walks Benjamin Franklin representing 13 colonies with no navy and no major victories. So Franklin, he did something brilliant. He didn't beg. He didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He leaned into being what the French court had never seen before. And I gotta make this note that he wasn't alone. Silas Deane had been quietly arranging secret arms shipments, and Arthur Lee, a sharp Virginian lawyer, was there too. But Franklin understood something neither of them could grasp. The French, well, they didn't need another diplomat in a powdered wig coming to them. He wore a plain brown coat. The fur cap he wore was instead of a wig. And the French, they actually went absolutely wild for him. They made medallions, they made engravings, snuff boxes. His face was everywhere. It was like paparazzi. Even Voltaire embraced him in public and called him a genius. This man was a celebrity for all intents and purposes in France. However, celebrity doesn't buy you ships and soldiers. The French foreign minister, Varens, wasn't swayed by a fur cap and a smile. He needed proof, and he needed proof that the Americans could actually win something against Britain. And fortunately, that proof arrived on December 4th, 1777. A messenger rode into Paris carrying news that changed everything. One word: Saratoga. An entire British army, nearly 6,000 men under General Burgoyne, had been surrounded and forced to surrender in upstate New York. It wasn't just a battle. It was a catastrophe for the British, the kind of defeat that echoed through every court in Europe. Well, Franklin, he heard the news before almost anyone else in Paris, and he knew exactly what it meant. Saratoga proved that Americans, well, they could win. And within days, he was in all kinds of meetings, reminding the French that Britain was now vulnerable and that this was France's moment to strike back against Britain. Varens, he finally agreed. So on February 6th, 1778, Franklin, Deane, and Lee put their signatures on two treaties. The first treaty, France formally recognized the United States as a nation, and the second, a military alliance. If France went to war with Britain, neither side would make peace without the other one. Now, just let that sink in for just a second. France, the most powerful country in Europe, had just agreed to fight alongside a complete ragtag group of colonies against Britain, their sworn enemy, and they were the other most powerful country in Europe. So get this, a printer from Philadelphia, a merchant from Connecticut, and a lawyer from Virginia had just changed the balance of world power. And Franklin was the one who really made it happen. Deane, he laid the groundwork and Lee was there, but make no mistake, Franklin, he was the face. He was the charm, and he was the celebrity. The man who left school at 10 pulled off the single most important diplomatic achievement of the American Revolution. Without those signatures, there is no Yorktown. The French fleet that blocked Chesapeake Bay and trapped Cornwallis that we talked about last week, which you can listen to right here, the French cannons that shelled British defenses for 11 days, and the French muskets that kept the Continental Army alive, none of that happens without Franklin in Paris. Washington himself wrote that the cooperation of the French fleet was what they were indebted to for the success at Yorktown. And that fleet only sailed because a 70-year-old man with gout and a fur cap convinced a king that America was worth betting on. The American Revolution was won on the battlefield. It was also won in drawing rooms, and it was won in dinner parties in Paris by a man who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a cannon or a bayonet. It's patience, it's charm, and being exactly the person the moment needs you to be. Well, Franklin, he stayed in Paris for years after the treaties. He raised more money, he was negotiating, and he was just plain being Benjamin Franklin. By the time he came home, he was one of the most famous people on all of Earth. And he had quite literally helped buy the victory that made the United States even possible. But all the money in France, all the ships, all the guns, all of that depended on one more thing going right. The British, well, the British, they weren't done. They had plans to crush the revolution even before the French could arrive. And that brings us to our finale. I mentioned him in the spy episode a couple episodes ago, which you can listen to right here. An enslaved man who walked straight into a British general's camp, fed him the exactly wrong information at exactly the right time, and helped spring a trap that basically ended the war. Sadly, his name barely made the history books, but that changes in part 4 next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe for more untold stories and more history. We do history every week here on Archives and Anchovies, the podcast about whatever it is I want to talk about that week. And as always, I want to wish you a great day, a pleasant evening, and a wonderful week ahead. Thank you.